Another thing about Lisa, and this is a detail that's easy to miss watching the movie from a modern day perspective, Lisa's quite bold. Now, obviously, it's bold to break into a murderer's apartment in the middle of the night in heels. So obviously, you know she's bold. She's quite sexually bold, which is that sort of in these days, it was considered scandalous for an unmarried woman to spend the night in a man's apartment. And that's his jokes about, oh, I have to check with my landlord if you're allowed to stay the night, because she really isn't supposed to stay there. It's sort of like an ethical violation or whatever. Um, but she's quite bold. Not only because she comes over to his, because I mean, she has her own apartment, he has his, but she proposes to spend the night at his place. And that's kind of a big moment. He's like, oh, wow, you're staying here. And she brings that suitcase with her. She's got that little special bag. And it's a cute moment because he was saying, like, you're going to need some serious luggage. And she says, oh, look, I have luggage. I can actually fit a lot of things in this very fancy bag. You see, I can travel all over the place. She's demonstrating to him not only that she's up for a globetrotting adventure, but that she's up for a sexual adventure also. And she's quite bold about staying. She's forward in a good way about staying in his house. She knows what she wants and she goes after it. She wants him. He doesn't want to marry her, and she's going to fix this problem. And she sort of demonstrates why she'd be great. And going into Thorwald's apartment is only part of it. She goes to his house with lingerie. And she's got, sexy things to wear. But really crucially, she doesn't hide when the detective comes, right? When the detective comes to visit Jeffries, she's pretty bold with him. The suitcase is out, her lingerie is out, her little nighttime slippers are out. She's left them out. She's not embarrassed at all by that. And when the detective sees them, he's like, he says, do you tell your landlord everything? Because the detective is like, oh shit, this unmarried woman is going to spend the night at the house. She's bought sexy, pajamas and, little slippers and stuff. And she's not like embarrassed. She's not trying to cover it up. She's not trying to hide. She's like, she comes out with, she's like, you want some brandy? Have a glass of brandy. Let's all drink together like adults. She's very tough, and it makes me absolutely love her because she's really willing to. She's not ashamed of herself. Like she's open. She's tough and she's bold. And it's one of the things that we really like her. One of the things that we really like about her. In fact, there's even a reference to bold women in Hollywood movies from the 1930s. She mentions His Girl Friday, which is a great movie, which again also features a guy with a woman and the woman in the movie is very bold and adventuresome, and so she really tries to. She's sort of like that. So there's some Hollywood precedent for like the bold adventure woman, and she's fantastic. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is the structure of the film. The structure of the film. Now, all movies are divided into 3 acts. Just about all. Basically, every movie you can think of is divided into 3 acts. Act 1 is about half an hour. Act 2 is 1 hour in the middle. And Act 3 is a half an hour at the end. And obviously, that gets adjusted if the movie is 2.5 hours or something, or 90 minutes or whatever. But that's basically the structure that all movies follow. So I don't think I need to go into a huge amount of detail here. So I wanted to tell you about the acts and the structure and how it's set up. And so I made a little handout for you that describes the acts and how they work. But what I did is I used Rear Window as the example on the handout. So you might not want to read that handout until you've seen the movie because it'll spoil the whole movie for you. But you shouldn't. If you're hearing that now, you've already had the movie spoiled. So. But the basic thing is that Act 1 introduces the characters and the setting. And then at the end of Act 1, about 30 minutes in, something happens that causes the whole story to change. So about 30 minutes in, you hear a yell. Jimmy Stewart hears a yell in the courtyard. And then the whole middle section is trying to sort of solve this murder. Yeah. And it's also, and then Act 2 is the whole thing where they're trying to prove that Thorwald killed his wife. So Act 1 is you learn about Lisa and Jeff in the setting. Act 2 is investigate Thorwald, right? And that takes up the middle hours. The first half hour is introduction to characters and setting. Middle of the movie is the main problem the movie is dealing with. The last 30 minutes of the movie is Act 3. And you got to solve the problems that were set up in Act 1. And crucially, there's a gear shift of some kind or a change. It can't just be more Act 2. There has to be a shift. What's the shift? So the shift from what's called the break, the act break. The first act break between Act 1 and 2 is first we just meet all the characters, and then you hear a scream, and Jeffries begins to think there's been a murder, and investigating that murder is Act 2. What is the difference between Act 2 and Act 3? The difference is that in Act 3, there's a change, which is they realize they have to solve it themselves. They cannot rely on the police. Because all of Act 2 is trying to convince the police to arrest this guy. And then at the end of Act 2, they're like, he's not going to arrest him. And he's like, this is nonsense. And then they're like, oh, this is a real thing. And so in Act 3, they like, you know what, we're going to do it on their own. Hey, would you like to meet my film students? Hey. Guys, you're so lucky. It's Grace Kelly, my own personal Grace
Please.
Kelly. I'm Jeff, and she's Grace Kelly. And it's exactly because this is Maureen Mannerese, and she is a professor in the Academic Literacy and Linguistics office department, and she's a full professor, and she's a badass. And you can take classes with her and everything. And like Grace Kelly in Rear Window, she is a person who will wear amazing dresses and makeup, who is also, like Grace Kelly, massively smart, and also, like Grace Kelly, is up for globe-trotting adventures. See, one of the differences between my life and Rear Window is that I don't really want to go on adventures, and she does. So she's gotten me to travel all over the world. She took me to India, and she took me to, Hawaii on a lava field where a ballistic missile tried to kill me. It's a whole story. Anyway,
the whole thing. Anyway, I just can't drink coffee.
Grace Kelly, guys, you're super lucky to be getting this.
How are you guys doing?
Thank you. I think they're doing good.
Are they learning about Rear Window?
We're wrapping up Rear Window. We're heading towards the end of Rear Window.
Ooh, very exciting. All right, well, enjoy.
Okay, I'll be in a couple of minutes.
You guys are awesome.
Yay!
Yay!
Oh, I'm having a good time.
Oh,
okay.
Boy, we just miss seeing our students so much.
I miss all my students. I'm watching these movies angry. I'm legit angry to not have you there to watch them with me. All right, well, I'll be in just a couple of seconds. All right.
Nice to meet you guys. Bye!
So if Act 1 is learning about Lisa and Jeff's life in the setting, and then Act 2 is investigate Thorwald, Act 3 ends when they realize the police are never getting involved in this, and they're pretty much going to have to solve it themselves. And solving it themselves will fix the problem established in Act 1, which is Jeff and Lisa's relationship. That in Act 1, Jeff and Lisa were going to break up because she's not adventurous enough for him. By the end of Act 3, he realizes, because of the whole Thorwald thing, that she is actually an exciting person, and their whole relationship is saved. Now, it's also worth pointing out that I mentioned the first act is half an hour, and the second act is an hour, and the third act is 30 minutes. Third act is usually a little more intense. Why is the third act more intense in this case? Because they're on their own. There's no police, so they're going in without a gun. They're going, and they just have to solve it themselves. Now, if you want to get fancy with this, the acts are divided up into 15-minute sequences. So Act 1 has 2 15-minute sequences, and Act 2 has 4 15-minute sequences, and Act 3 has 2 15-minute sequences. And you could subdivide them like that. So just to give you a simple example in Rear Window, Act 1 is Jeff and his apartment. I'm sorry, Act 1, Sequence 1 is Jeff and his apartment. Sequence 2 is Jeff and Lisa's relationship. Then there's a murder, and we're into Act 2. So that's, and I know it seems crazy to say this, but basically all Hollywood movies are structured pretty much like that. That's how they work. Just about any movie you give me, we can do that with. And you want to look, what you're looking for is a gear change. Think about it like there's a change in the story where something different happens. And then they're on an adventure, and then gear shifts again. And we could do this with a pile of movies, but Rear Window's the best example because theoretically you've all seen it because of this class. So that's the act breaks in Rear Window. Good. And guys, I think we've done a really good job here. I forgot to say, one of the little details I like about the sort of props is that when they're talking about blood and chopping up blood and flesh, he's trying to eat his breakfast. And when she mentions blood, he's drinking coffee. And when she mentions chopping up flesh, he's going to eat a piece of sausage and puts them on his breakfast. It's cute. Because what she's talking about is mirrored in what he's doing. It makes the scene funnier and more dynamic because it's like horror, but also humor. Okay, so guys, I think we're doing good on this movie. We're ready to get to the big stuff in the next video or two and really talk about what's going on in this movie. We're ready to talk about theme and ideas, and they are amazing. This is fundamentally a movie about voyeurism, and it's fundamentally a movie about the audience as voyeurs. We'll talk about that in the next video.